What's up, YouTube? In today's tutorial, we're going to learn how to draw lines between two divs we can place wherever we want in Webflow and update the position of those lines on scroll. This tutorial was requested by one of my patrons, and I thought it was a pretty good example of how to use some custom code to make this and some SVGs to make this come about. So let's get started building it out here in Webflow. I'll jump over to Webflow and we'll add a section element. Let's give it the class of section, and I'll give it some top and bottom padding of 6 rem, and we'll give it some left and right padding of 10%. Let's give it a min height of 100 VH so it spans at least the full screen, and we'll also drop inside this a div, give it the class of item, and in that item, let's add an H2 and a paragraph. And we'll select our item here, give it a max width of 22 rem, and I'll just delete some text out of this. Now inside the item, we're going to drop another div and we'll call this dot start. And let's give it a width and height of 1.2 rem, and let's give it a position of absolute to the bottom left of the item, which means this item here will need position relative. So once we have that set, let's grab this dot and we'll give it a border of 1 pixel, reset the color so the border color inherits from font color, give it a radius of 50% to make it a circle, and let's add a background color of black so we don't see anything behind it. Then we can use some margin to position it. So I'll give it 2 rem margin to push it over, some negative margin to push it down. And once we have that set, let's duplicate our item 2 times. We'll select the section and let's apply flex, vertical, and justify to space apart. And then for shorter screen heights, let's also add some gap of 10 rem to make sure the items never touch each other. Once we have that set, let's go ahead and select the second item here. We'll give it a combo of is alt, and let's give it some margin on the left of auto. We'll give this second dot a combo is 2, and that's just going to be to position it wherever we want, maybe somewhere there. And let's give this last dot a combo is 3, and just position this wherever we want, maybe somewhere over here for now. And once we have that set, let's set up the spline scene. So I'll drop a div, give this the class of spline wrap, and let's give it a height of 100 VH. And inside that, we'll drop another div, give it the class of spline item, and give it a width of 60%. So we're going to grab the spline wrap and apply flex to center the child inside, like so. And inside that item, let's drop an actual spline element. And I'll just paste the URL to a spline 3D scene I have. Let's see, let me grab it from over here and paste it in. So once we have that set, we'll just give this a class of spline element. And I'll give it a ratio of a perfect square. There we go. Oops, square right there. Okay. And inside the spline item, let's drop a div. We'll call this, call it dot end, and we'll position it absolute to the top left of the item, which means the item here needs position relative. And with that dot end, let's give it a width of 0.8 rem, height 0.8 rem, and let's give it a radius 50%. To make it a circle. Background color can be white. And when we resize the width of this item on different breakpoints, we'll want the position of the dots to also scale. So we're going to use some margin using percent. That way this offset is based on the size of that parent div, the item. So we can push this over some, push it over that way, and we'll go ahead and duplicate the dot end. Give this one a combo is 2, and use that to push it over maybe somewhere over here, and maybe push it down a little bit. And let's duplicate the dot end again. Give this one a combo of is 3, and we'll push this down even more, and maybe push this over a bit, somewhere over there. So once we have those set, let's set the spline wrap here to position fixed, and anchor it to the top. And just to demonstrate scrolling, I'll add some spacer divs here above and below the section. We'll call this spacer. Let's give it a height of 80 VH. And I'll duplicate the spacer, have one below. So while we're scrolling past these spacers in the section, the spline wrap is staying with us there in the background. And inside that spline wrap, I'll also drop a div bring it up to the top. We'll call this line wrap. And we're going to have some SVG elements that, SVG lines that we're using to draw a line between this point and that point. So I'm just going to position this absolute to cover its full parent. And this is what's going to hold those SVGs. It'll be 100% width and height, and we'll add the SVGs with JavaScript. So as far as stacking order goes, this spline element will want to be at z-index 1. And then the lines need to sit right on top of the 3D. So we'll give them z-index 2. Since this parent doesn't have a z-index applied, this will be able to go right above that. And then the dots need to be on top of the lines. So they'll be z-index 3. And that's all for that. The section here can be relative z-index 2. And then the spline wrap can be z-index 1. So it sits right below the section. And that should be everything for that order. So once we have that set, we can head over to Code Sandbox and we'll start setting up kind of our project. So let's see, we're going to create a new sandbox right here, and we'll create an HTML CSS project, and just making sure everything's good on this end. Okay, so once we have that set, let's create a new file here. We'll call this script.js. And this is our file that we'll be writing our JavaScript in. This is the URL to our project. So we'll just copy that, head back over to Webflow, and open up our page settings. And right here in the closing body, we'll create open and closing scripts. And then inside this first script, we'll say source equals the URL to our sandbox / script.js. So we're pulling that JavaScript file. And we can go ahead and save this. And I'll go ahead and publish this so we can push it live. So what we're going to be doing is we want to draw a line between this first dot and then the first dot in this list. The second dot goes to the second dot in this list, and then the third one here should go to the third dot. And instead of writing 3 separate scripts, we're just going to use a JavaScript loop and write one script that can connect dot 1 to dot 1 here. And then just it'll repeat for each of the 3 dots. So I'll go ahead and open this up, and we're here. Let me drag this up to the top. So let's go in here, and I'll collapse this panel just to give us more space. Zoom in a little bit. Let's use a jQuery each loop, and we're going to loop through each of our starting dots. So dot start dot each, and inside we'll have a function. And we're going to want to find, we'll say let the start dot be this dot that we're currently looping through. So the same thing will repeat for each of the 3 start dots. And then we want to connect it to the related end dot. So we'll say end dot can equal, and we'll grab our dot ends. This is all of them. And we want to filter it down to only the one that matches our current start dot. So inside this function, we can pass an index, and that's just the number of this dot. And we can use that to connect it to the related end dot, so the 2 numbers match. So while we're looping through the first dot, we're grabbing the first end dot, and that's how we'll connect them too. So once we have that set, let's go ahead and create basically an SVG for each of these start dots. So to create an SVG, we can I'll use the backticks here so we can have different things inside it, but we'll create an SVG. Open and closing tags, and inside this SVG we're going to want a line element, and line's a self-closing tag, so it just looks like this. And we're going to want to give the SVG like a view box setting, and that's where we set the ratio of this SVG. So it's 0 by 0, and then we'll want to do our screen width. Say our screen was 1920 pixels wide, and our screen height 1080 tall, so that our SVG just covers the full screen. Of course, we're going to want to plug in dynamic values for this. So we'll come back to that in just a second, so that every time we resize the screen, our SVG updates to be the size of that screen. So, and then for the line, we can do things like it's x1, which is its starting value, and we can plug in any number there. So this is a pixel offset relative to the screen. So like maybe the line starting point is 50 pixels over from the left. And we can do y1, maybe it's like 200 pixels over from the top. And then we can do its endpoint, which is the ending of the line is x2. and maybe that's like 350 pixels from the left, and it's Y2. How far is the ending point from the top of the screen? Maybe that's 800 pixels from the top. And these top and bottom is relative to the size of the SVG. That's why the SVG needs to match our screen width and height. So of course we want to figure these out dynamically too, so that this start point X and Y matches the position of the dot, and this end point X and Y matches the position of the end dot. So that's why we have these dots here. So what I'm going to do is create basically a function that we can use to calculate the position from top and bottom of any of these dots. So we'll create a function here. We'll call this one get top, and will allow us to pass in an element, any element we want, to get the top offset. And the first thing we're going to do is say let top equal, and we'll do the element we pass into the function offset from top, and that should just tell us how far this element is from the top of the screen. And let's say return top. So once we have that set, we can run this function and it'll tell us how far this element is from the top of the screen. So let's do this with the start dot for starters. So this is going to loop through each start dot, and it's going to get how far that start dot is from the top of the screen, and it'll get that there. Let's do a console.log just so we see how far that element is from top. Save, and let's go back to our project, and let's inspect. Let's go to console. So it's saying this first dot is 900 pixels from top of screen, the second dot is 1100, and this last dot is like 1400 from top. So what we could do now that we have that, and let's do the same thing for our end dot. So we have how far our start dot is from top of screen, and we have how far our end dot is. Let's come back to that in just a second. Let's also get the left. So for that, we can just say function get left, and we'll go ahead and pass in the element again, and we're going to say let left equal l.offset dot left. So it should tell us how far the dot is from left of screen, and then we just want to return whatever that value is. So now if we run this function, let's see, inside our each loop right here, let me bring this, collapse this panel so we can see all our code. So now we can do the same thing for get left for our start dot, and we can get left offset for the end dot as well, like so. So now we can run these, and we want to plug it dynamically into this function here. So what we'll do is we'll say, so this is for our starting dot. We want to get its left here, and we want to get its top and plug it dynamically into this. All right, and we'll do the same thing for this one here. The end dot will get its left here, and we'll get its distance from the top of the screen and plug it in here. Okay. Oops, did I have that? Yeah, that's right. So this is from top and this is from left. Okay. And the only other thing we'll need to do is make sure that the size of our SVG matches the size of the screen. So to do that, I'll just replace this with window dot inner width, and that'll get the width of the screen. And we'll replace this one with window dot inner height, and that should return the height of the screen. So now if we refresh over here-ish, let's see if we can get these lines to draw on. Oh, and we need to add this SVG to the page. So we've created the SVG, we haven't placed it anywhere. So we're gonna do, I'll just save it in a variable. I'll say let my SVG equal this guy. Then we can grab my SVG and append it to the line wrap that we created in Webflow so that each of these SVGs end up inside that line wrap. And one other thing we'll probably want to do is position them absolute so they're all on top of each other. So I'll just say let SVG styles, and let's create some styles for this SVG. I'll give it opacity of 0.4, so it's 40% opacity. Let's give it a width of 100% of its parent, height 100% of parent. Let's give it a pointer events none, just so it's not clickable. Let's give it position, position absolute, 0 pixels from the top of the screen, so top 0, and 0 pixels from the left of the screen, like so. And let's apply these SVG styles to each of these SVGs when we create them. So I'll say style equals, and in parentheses, in quotes, oops, let's pass in our SVG styles so they're all absolute on top of each other inside of the line wrap. And once we have that set, we can come back over here. Let's check out our line wrap. So now we have an SVG. For each of these, the opacity is there, the lines are there. We're not quite seeing them for some reason. I think we need to give the lines a color. So let's say on this line, which is right here, let's give it a stroke, I believe, of current color. So it's just the stroke color of the lines matches the section or the font color of the parent. And so now, okay. So now we have these lines. Let me see if I refresh right about here. We have these lines, but they're not quite centered. Maybe I can zoom out some. They're not quite centered within each dot here. So to do that, right now it's anchored to the top left corner of each dot, and we want the lines to fall right in the middle of each dot. So what we can do is come back over here, and we want to get the size of each dot. So we're going to say let center of the dot equal this element, and we'll do, for the top, we'll do dot inner height. So it'll give us the height of that dot, and we want to divide it by 2. So we're taking half of the height of this dot, and we want to add that to our distance from the top of the screen. So the line doesn't only fall however far the dot is from the top of the screen, but plus half of the dot's height. And we'll want to do the same thing for the width. We'll say let center equal element dot inner width divided by 2. So we're getting half of this dot's width. And then we'll add this to our offset of how far the line should be plotted from the left of the screen. So we'll center that. And now if we refresh, those lines should fall hopefully right in the middle of each dot. Let's see what's going on here. Line wrap, we have a console error here, so let's just check. Dot length is not a number. Let's see. Something went wrong in here. Length, inner width divided by 2 plus center. Let's see what this is returning. Console.log center. Just to make sure we're getting the right thing for these. Oh, and you know what? This is missing open and closing parentheses, and that's the reason why it wasn't working. Okay, so let's save that. Let's come back over here. Perfect. So those fall right there in the middle, and that's good. So you'll notice whenever I scroll down and I refresh, the start and end points are all kind of messed up here. So now it's not quite working. It only works when I'm all the way at the top of the screen. If I'm scrolled a little bit, the offset isn't quite working. And that's because we're calculating the dot's position from the top of the screen, but that doesn't account for our scroll bar progress. So just to fix that, and we only need to do this for the top, this is all we're worried about here, is we want to subtract from the top distance from top of screen, also how far we've scrolled. So we'll do document dot scroll top, like so. So our offset from the top of the screen minus how far we scrolled, and that should make sure that even when we're scrolled down some and we refresh, these are always perfectly lined up. Refresh again here, and they're lined up. So this is working here only on first load, but it needs to constantly be updating the position of the lines while we're scrolling. And also if we resize our window here, it's not lined up anymore. So when we resize the window, we need to re-update the position of the lines, the size of the SVG, all of that good stuff. So let's come back over here. And so we've already appended the SVG to our line wrap. We've added some styles to these SVGs. And what I'm going to do is break this out into kind of its own function. That way we can constantly update those SVG styles whenever we want. So I'll create a function called set styles, and we can just create that here. And then what we're going to want to do is we have the SVG here. I'll also get the line inside the SVG. So I'll say let my line equal my SVG dot find, and we'll find that line element inside. So we have the line, we have the SVG. Let me move this up here. All right. And we're going to say my SVG, and we'll set an attribute on it, and we'll set the view box attribute. And we're going to set that to be basically this whole view box setting we have here. So that way we're not applying this view box right when we create the SVG, where we can run this function to update the view box on the SVG whenever we want. And then we're going to do the same thing. I'll copy all this. We want to update the X1 attribute, and this is going to be on the line itself. So we'll say my line, we're updating X1 to be this get left of start dot. Don't need to wrap it in a string anymore, so something like that. And then we don't have to create X1 there. I'll go ahead and delete all that, so we just have a clean line SVG style. So let's copy this. And then we'll say let Y1 equal the top distance of the starting dot. And then we can copy that. And we'll say let X2 and Y2 equal get left of end dot and get top of end dot here. So that should, and then we can run this function right on page load. Right after we create the SVG, we can apply all of these dynamic styles to it, the width and height of the SVG and the positions of the dots. But then we'll also want to do it whenever we're scrolling. So we'll say document, and we'll say on, and we can say scroll. We'll create a function, and let's go ahead and just say we'll run these set styles every time we're scrolling. And let's copy this. We also want to run it when we resize. So we'll say, let's delete this actually. Window.add event listener resize. So whenever we resize our screen, create a function, and we'll update the value, the styles, the position of those lines. So if we go ahead and save this and we come back over here, now it should run correctly. Let's see. Check for any console errors. Unexpected string. If we click this, sometimes it takes you to where that unexpected string is, but it's not in this case. View box, it's probably somewhere here if I had to guess. There's somewhere that I created. Oh, right here. Okay. That should have just been a semicolon. So refresh. There we go. All right. So now it's updating while we're scrolling. And let's try and resize our window. And the position also updates while we're resizing our browser. So those lines are constantly being drawn on. One last thing. Whenever we're down here, we probably don't want to see the lines at first. And we want them to reveal. And then here, when we scroll out, we want them to hide again. So we're only seeing the lines when this text is closer to the center of the screen. So to do that, we can just use a Webflow interaction. I'll apply it to this section element. So we'll come over to interactions, create an element trigger of while scrolling in view applied to the class. Let's play our animation. And let's say something like reveal lines. And we're going to take each of the dot elements, create an opacity on them. The starting opacity should be 0, and they should go to 100% opacity. This should happen at the 30% mark. We'll say 35. and this opacity 0 will happen at 30. And let's create another opacity here. 100%, this can happen at the, let's say 55% or 65% mark. One more opacity here at the 70% mark that goes back to 0%. So if we preview this, what should happen is the dots are hidden, and then once we hit about 35%, it's revealed. And then once we hit about 65% right here, it starts hiding again. So that's for those end dots, and we'll do the same for this dot start. Let's add an opacity. They'll go from 0. And this probably could be done a little bit faster with just one utility class applied to all these elements, but for now, I'll just add it in line for each of these classes. Dot start goes to 0, and then we'll do the same thing with a line wrap, which holds all our SVGs. So the opacity will be from 0 to opacity 100, and then opacity 100 here, and then back to 0 so that it hides the lines. So the lines and all the dots should be hidden when we scroll out of view. So let's publish that and come back, check it out. Sure enough, everything's hidden. We scroll into view. Oops, let's let this load. Just taking a second there. There we go. All right. So we scroll into view and they reveal, and we scroll out of view and the lines hide. And that all looks good to go. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this live stream. Check out the clonable in the description below to get this sort of build, and I'll catch you in the next one. Goodbye.